Hello, my name is Brepod, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite game series of all time, Sonic the Hedgehog, and more specifically, the Sonic the Hedgehog timeline. Now, when you have a series that has run for so long, like Sonic the Hedgehog, inevitably you're going to have some issues when it comes to continuity, different writers taking the mantle, different takes that people have on the characters, and generally which games fit in what order in the timeline. Sonic the Hedgehog has been running since the mid-90s. It has had so many different writers and so many different takes and concepts of different things about different characters, and it's kind of hard to understand where exactly certain games fall on the timeline, mainly for the fact that SEGA cannot get their act together. You see, for example, the official or the closest official timeline I could find for Sonic the Hedgehog looks like this. What is this? This is garbage. This is nonsense. And this has led to people having issues with certain parts of the timeline. Certain games being cut out and not considered canon when they probably definitely should be. That has led to people creating timelines like this, or like this, or like this. What is going on? So today I'm here to at least throw my hat into the ring a little bit. I'm here to present my arguments and what order I think the games go in the timelines. For the most part, I'm just going to be sticking to the mainline games. I probably won't dip too heavily into the spin-offs. The only time I probably will is if some detail in one of the games makes a spin-off canon, in which case I kind of have to mention it. But this is really just me throwing my hat into the ring and trying to give my take on what the Sonic timeline is, especially because who knows what it is at this point? Not even SEGA knows, really. Sonic the Hedgehog as a series doesn't typically operate like a normal series would when it comes to sequels. So you'd have the first game or movie, and then you'd have the second one or the third one. Typically they'd be labeled like something like Mario or Mario 2 or Mario 3. And typically you can kind of understand that these games go from 1 to 2 to 3. It's not the case with Sonic the Hedgehog. You see, starting out, you would think that, oh, Sonic the Hedgehog 1 is the first game in the timeline, when no, it's not actually. Hell, it wasn't even the first Sonic game ever released. You see, 1 month before Sonic the Hedgehog was released worldwide to the Sega Genesis home console, there was an arcade machine exclusively to Japan called Sega Sonic the Hedgehog. In this game, Sonic teams up with characters such as Mighty the Armadillo and Ray the Flying Squirrel, characters that are mentioned in this game and one other game and are never mentioned again. This game could be argued to be put anywhere with the classic set, but because it was the first one that was ever introduced and the first Sonic game ever released, and this is before any of the other mainline characters are introduced, I'm pretty confident in saying that this is the first ever game in the Sonic timeline where he meets Dr. Robotnik and stops his evil plans. From Sonic Arcade, you have Sonic 1, pretty standard, and you would think you would go from Sonic 1 to Sonic 2, but that's not actually the case. You see, after the release of Sonic 1, Sonic Team split into two halves. One went into America to work on Sonic CD, and one worked in Japan to work on Sonic 2. Now, while Sonic CD released after Sonic 2, canonically it takes place after Sonic 1, but before Sonic 2. This is shown in a few ways. Mainly the fact that Sonic has, to this point, not met Tails yet, a character he doesn't meet until Sonic 2, and this is the introduction to Metal Sonic, so that's pretty cool. Now, the whole point of Sonic CD is that there's this thing where you speed up fast enough and go back in time to different versions of each level, which point Sonic can destroy these generators from ruining the level, and then you go back in time to the present and get a good future or bad future depending on how you play. Now, the canon ending, I believe, is that Sonic destroys most of them, and then he has to rescue Amy from the clutches of Dr. Robotnik and Metal Sonic, to which he races on Stardust Speedway, specifically though the bad future for some reason. I don't know why, maybe it's just the most iconic, but he races Metal Sonic and ultimately beats him, and thusly goes straight from Sonic CD to Sonic 2. From Sonic 2 is pretty simple, follows straight into the story beats of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, The main story of Sonic 2 is that Robotnik is trying to create this giant, like, basically a Death Star. He calls it the Death Egg. It's basically a Death Star. He ultimately stops Eggman. He doesn't destroy the Death Star. Death Star. He doesn't ultimately destroy the Death Egg though, and it ends up just crashing below the ocean, to which is a very bad thing, and ultimately crashes near this place called Angel Island, where Sonic and Tails ultimately investigate, but it's too late because Robotnik has tricked its resident, like, protector, Knuckles, to assaulting Sonic, punching him straight out of super form, stealing the Chaos Emeralds, and essentially telling him, hey, you see that blue guy? He's gonna get you. Better fuck him up. Now from Sonic 3 and Knuckles, there is probably Knuckles Chaotix, but because it's a spin-off and it wasn't developed by Sonic Team, I'm not going to count it, and I'm not going to even really think about it too hard. From here is where they retroactively made the Sonic timeline really confusing. See, back in 2011, a game called Sonic Generations was released, and the whole marketing point was that you could play as both modern Sonic and classic Sonic from the first 3 Genesis games. Now, it's not exactly stated at exactly what point that classic Sonic was taken from the classic games to the modern ones, but considering the fact that there is also classic Tails and that the first 3 levels are based off of Sonic 1, 2, and 3 and Knuckles respectively, I'm pretty confident in saying that it was taken from after Sonic 3 and Knuckles into the future with Sonic Generations, and at the end of Sonic Generations he's sent back to his own time, so yeah? So let's review. Sonic Arcade, Sonic 1, Sonic CD, 2, 3, and Knuckles. Pretty simple so far with a little bit of time traveling shenanigans, but we're going to get into why this gets a little bit difficult in just a second. From here, we're still technically in the classic timeline. From Sonic 3 and Knuckles, and after the events of Generations, Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles are investigating a big, powered time warp energy signature that's happening. Eggman has excavated this gem called the Phantom Ruby, and he's using it to warp time and space, and he's evil, and they gotta stop him. Now, at the end of Sonic Mania, if you manage to collect all of the Chaos Emeralds, you have a true final boss against the hard-boiled Heavy Emperor and Eggman, to which you defeat both of them, and the Phantom Ruby essentially, again, time warps classic Sonic all the way from the classic games to way in the future to Sonic Forces. And the reason we know that it's the same Sonic is the fact that he goes through a portal, the portal happens, the events of Sonic Forces happen where classic Sonic is there. They talk to him like, hey, we've known you before. They say a stupid line like, oh, you're that Sonic from another dimension. Which, no, he's the Sonic from like 20 years ago, essentially. It's just a really bad, stupid line. We know that classic Sonic goes back from Forces to Mania, mainly due to the fact that he strikes the same pose happens in Mania's DLC, and essentially the events of Mania's DLC happen where Mighty and Ray show up again, so yeah, enjoy them while they last, because they will not show up ever again. Ever. SEGA does not care about Ray the Flying Squirrel and Mighty the Armadillo. It's also worth stating that at some point at this time, Sonic 4 happens. It's not really clear. It's probably after Sonic 3, and then after Mania. Their designs look like the characters have aged up a little bit, and they're more in line with their classic designs, but they're in these old levels. Sonic 4 really wasn't a great game, so we're just gonna move on. From here, it's pretty simple. Sonic Adventure, and then its sequel, Sonic Adventure 2. Sonic Adventure 2 is probably more important lore-wise. Essentially, the character of Shadow the Hedgehog is shown. There's this thing called the Space Colony arc. Shadow was created as the ultimate life form, and his friend Maria gets gunned down by the US government. Just let that sink in. They shot him. They shot a person in a Sonic the Hedgehog game, canonically.
Discover his true purpose.
This will remind you what the humans did to you.
Maria!
The whole plot of Sonic Adventure 2 is that essentially Eggman wants to use the Space Colony Arc and its like mega super death laser to essentially throw the world into being a hostage, and if the world doesn't comply what he wants, then he's gonna blow up the whole planet. Plot twist though, it turns out that when Eggman attempts to fire the laser, that it fails, and that his grandfather, who was also the, I believe, father of Maria. It's really weird. I'm not going to get into the Eggman family tree. I'm not going to get into it. But essentially, after they gunned down a little girl, Maria! Gerald fell into like a fit of like depression and essentially reprogrammed the arc that if all 7 Chaos Emeralds were brought to it, it would crash into the earth and blow up. And that's bad. So eventually Sonic and Eggman put aside their differences and they work together to stop it from crashing. They make it their way to the pit of the Ark, where this thing called the Bio Lizard shows up, which was actually somehow a prototype to Shadow the Hedgehog, the ultimate life form. Shadow shows up, he has a change of heart, and he beats up the Bio Lizard. They go Super Sonic, Super Shadow. They stop the Ark from crashing into the Earth, but at the cost of Shadow running out of stamina and plummeting to the Earth and dying.
Change the world. My final message. Goodbye.
Yeah, see, originally they were going to kill off Shadow, but they realized he was far too popular, so they just kind of kept him around, and to this day they really don't know what to do with him. So, hey, he's a fan favorite though. From here it maintains pretty simple. From Adventure 2 is to Heroes. We know that it's the direct sequel because of the Team Dark storyline. Essentially, the whole point of Sonic Heroes is that there's 4 teams. There's Team Sonic, Team Dark, Team Rose, and Team Chaotix. Each of them have their own kind of plot lines, and they follow essentially the same story, though. In the Team Dark plotline, it's revealed that Shadow actually survived his fall to Earth, and he's got like amnesia now, and it turns out that Eggman's been building like android clones, so maybe the Shadow we're playing as isn't even the real Shadow. So eventually they find out that Eggman wasn't even really a threat in Heroes. Turns out that Metal Sonic is back and that he became Neo Metal Sonic, and it's such a cool design, and he basically like becomes this like mecha dragon, and Super Sonic and friends have to beat him up, and they beat him up, and to this day I don't think we've ever seen a return of Metal Sonic in a mainline game, which is kind of a shame, but whatever. From Heroes we go straight into Shadow the Hedgehog. Shadow the Hedgehog essentially follows up the plotline of Team Dark in Heroes, where Shadow is still kind of working through his memories, and he's like not really sure if he's an android, but event doesn't really matter because a giant group of aliens show up, and Shadow is like, oh well, puny humans, they better deal with that. But then the leader of the alien group, Black Doom, shows up and he's like, hey Shadow, I know your past, help me out and I'll tell you. And Shadow's like, sure. And oh boy, this is where we gotta get into the timeline and the branching paths of Shadow the Hedgehog. So Shadow the Hedgehog has this really annoying branching path system. Essentially, if you choose to do the hero route in a level, choose to do the villain route in a level, or if you choose to do like just go to the end of a level, it can branch, and only after you complete the game 11 times does the game reward you with the final storyline. Essentially, Black Doom is like, haha, I tricked you. Actually, you were made when Gerald Robotnik wanted to create the ultimate life form, and he used my blood to do that, so actually you're part alien, but it doesn't matter, I'm gonna blow up the Earth. And he tries to use this thing called the Black Comet and blow up the Earth, but it doesn't work because Super Shadow shows up, and he throws the Black Comet into space, and he blows it up with the giant cannon that the Space Colony Arc had. So, yeah. Okay, so here is when we kind of have to get into a little bit of speculation as to what the timeline is. From here, the next few games are Sonic Advanced 1, 2, and 3, and while these games don't really have like a hard plot line, we do get introduced to Cream the Rabbit though, so that's pretty cool. Fun fact, Cream was in Sonic Adventure 1, but she was reduced to as a background character, and we never had a really like name for her until now, so that's pretty cool. While these games don't really have a like hard plot, it's pretty safe to assume that they happen at some point after Shadow the Hedgehog, just because of they were released after. While we don't know exactly when these games take place, we know that they take place probably after Adventure and Adventure 2 at the bare minimum, and it's probably safe to assume that they happen after Shadow the Hedgehog. This is because after Advanced 1, 2, and 3, a game called Sonic Battle was released where they used the same sprites. Cream... God damn it, my phone beeped. While we don't have a definitive point in where these games are in the timeline, we can probably safely assume that it happened after Adventure 2 at the least, and probably the latest it can happen is very likely Shadow the Hedgehog. This is because after Adventure 1, 2, and 3, which happened pretty simultaneously, or like back to back to back, we get a game called Sonic Battle, to which Cream shows up again. They have, and they reuse a lot of the same sprites. Shadow is also there, but he's not really an antagonist anymore, so it's probably safe to assume that this game happens after Shadow the Hedgehog, where Shadow's kind of mellowed out and has become a reluctant ally to the group. Okay, so here's where we talk about Sonic 06. Now, Sonic 06, I'm not going to get into it. Nothing I can say nothing that I can say about Sonic 06, nothing I can say about Sonic 06 hasn't already been said. It is a awful game, bad glitches, bad storyline. It's got great music though, but so do a bunch of other Sonic games. It is just bad. Technically, the events of the games don't really happen. At the end of the game, Sonic and Shadow and another guy, Silver. I forgot to mention Silver. So Silver is like the future Hedgehog who shows up to help the gang. Like, no, that's not what happened. So Silver is like, think of him like Future Trunks from Dragon Ball, if that makes sense. He's from a very messed up future, and he comes back in time to beat up Sonic because he thinks that Sonic is like the key to all of the bad stuff that happens in his timeline, but it's really not. A whole bunch of shenanigans happen, and eventually Super Sonic, Super Shadow, and Super Silver team up. They fight a fourth dimensional time-space creature, and essentially they blow him up, and they blow out this like time candle, and the events of the game never technically happen. But there is one thing I gotta mention. You see, diehard Sonic fans will know that the events of Sonic 06 introduce Blaze the Cat. Blaze is another fan favorite character, but the only issue is how they present her past. You see, fans will recognize that Blaze was actually introduced in a 2004 DS game called Sonic Rush, and subsequently its sequel in 2005, Sonic Rush Adventure, where she was a princess of another dimension. But in this game, they just completely ignore that, and she is just a friend of Silver's from the future. I don't know. At the end of Silver's storyline in 06, she essentially sacrifices herself to give Silver a chance, and she like gets whooshed away to another dimension. She doesn't really meet Sonic though, so I'm going to just operate off of the assumption that while she was whisked away to another dimension, she ended up in another dimension and became princess somehow, and then the events of 06 were then erased from the timeline, and while they were erased, they were just kind of became semi-canon, semi-not canon, and it just kind of depends on what Sonic Team needs for the day. I bring this up because it is, in my opinion, that after 06 is when Rush and Rush Adventure should take place. For one, Sonic never meets Blaze in the entirety of 06, I don't think. So, for all he knows, she legitimately is the princess of another dimension, and I think that's fine. Blaze becomes friends with Cream and ultimately, eventually friends with Sonic.
Have a nice ball, you stupid bitch.
And in its sequel, Sonic Rush Adventure, same thing happens. They become friends and they fight off evil, and that's that. I want to take the minute to tell you go listen to the Sonic Rush soundtrack. It is phenomenal. It's made by Hideki Naganuma, it's the same guy who did Jet Set Radio. It is amazing. Go listen to it. It's so great. From Rush and Rush Adventure is kind of a weird point in time. It is my personal belief that Rivals happens at this point. This is the PSP racing game, I think. And then yeah. From here we kind of have a free space in the timeline. We don't really have a definitive concrete answer to what happened, so I'm just gonna kind of go in release order. This is really the point in time where Sonic Team was starting to get their act together, and they're really following plot lines from previous games, so good on them. So I'm just gonna go off release order. So after Rivals and Rivals 2, I think, is Sonic in the Secret Rings. Originally people thought that this was a spin-off, but it's not, and I'll get to why in a minute. Essentially the plot line of this game is that Sonic has a cold, and while he's at home he's reading the Arabian Nights, to which a genie pops out and it basically tells Sonic, "We gotta get the world rings, otherwise this evil genie's gonna blow up my world." And Sonic, being a cool dude, decides, okay, I'll help out. So he does. He saves the day, and it's kind of a really bad game. It's not even bad, it's just kind of not good to play anymore. But it does have Darkspine Sonic, and that's really, really cool. After Secret Rings, could very well be Black Knight, but it is my personal belief that after Secret Rings is Unleashed. This is just because that Unleashed was released in between both Sonic and the Secret Rings and Black Knight. These Black Knight and Secret Rings are part of a storybook series where Sonic went back in time into different stories. But Unleashed was released kind of in the middle, so I'm just going to assume that Unleashed happens in the middle. The whole plot line of Unleashed is that Eggman has blown up the Earth, and all of the continents are in different pieces, and Sonic turns into a werehog, and he puts the planet back together, and he makes friends with this guy called Chip, who is actually a guy called Light Gaia, who is basically a good god, and he's fighting this guy called Dark Gaia, who is the evil entity that Eggman has summoned in this game to separate the continents. So they beat him up, and Chip dies, I think. I don't know what he is, but he leaves behind a bracelet for Sonic to remember him by, and yada yada yada. After Unleashed is, in my opinion, Black Knight. Sonic and the Black Knights follows Sonic as he is thrown into the world of King Arthur and the Round Table, and shenanigans ensue, and he has a sword, and it's really cool, and the soundtrack is also really good. After Black Knight, Sonic Team kind of realized that they had a hit on their hands with Unleashed, so they decided to basically just replicate what really worked with Unleashed. So they made Sonic Colors, and it happened after Black Knight, so I'm just gonna assume it's what happens next. After Colors is Generations. The whole plot of Generations is that after Sonic Colors, Eggman was in space, and he found a time god, and he's essentially using the time god to warp and destroy all of his past failures and all of Sonic's history. Classic Sonic again is brought in from the classic games. He meets modern Sonic and is having his adventures, and they save the day throughout time and space. Confirmed certain games were canon. Specifically, it confirmed that obviously Sonic 1, 2, 3, and Knuckles, CD, Unleashed, Colors, yada yada, all the mainline games were canon, but it also canonized Secret Rings, Black Knight, and also Rush. We know that Secret Rings, and by extension probably Black Knight, are canon, because Tails asks him, wow, this is a pretty crazy adventure we're going on, and Sonic responds with, oh well, it's no crazy than saving genies in magic books or saving aliens in an interstellar amusement park. So magic books, genies, Secret Rings, by extension Black Knight. It also probably canonizes Rush. In the 3DS version of the game, there is a level that is based off of Water Palace from Sonic Rush, so at some point Rush happened, because of the fact that in the 3DS version of Sonic Generations, there is a level that is based off of Water Palace from Sonic Rush, so at some point Rush, and again by extension its sequel Rush Adventure, very likely happened. I want to take a second, and you're probably thinking, oh, what about Sonic Boom? What about Sonic Boom? I don't care about Sonic Boom. It's not canon. I'm not going to talk about it. It's really bad. It's just garbage. It's got bad writing. The only thing good about it is the cartoon, is because they actually tried to be funny. Yeah, so moving on. After Generations is Forces, and we know this because it happened. After Generations is very likely Forces. They bring back classic Sonic from Mania for some reason, and he plays really horribly, and Forces isn't like the worst of the Sonic games, but it's also not the best. But moving on from Forces is kind of an interesting point. You see, for the longest time, people considered that the Sonic Riders games were like either not canon, they were either a spin-off, or that they were so far in the future because Sonic isn't, it's a racing game, but he's using like futuristic hoverboards, and people just assumed, oh, this game happens in the future. But it doesn't, and I'm gonna get to. So there's 3 Riders games in total. There's Riders, Riders Zero Gravity, and Free Riders. So at some point those games happened, along with Team Sonic Racing, which featured the characters from Riders, which are never featured anywhere else besides the Riders series. So just gonna assume that Team Sonic Racing happened after Riders, and yeah. This brings us to the end of the Sonic timeline, which is Sonic Frontiers. And let me just stop to say, Sonic Frontiers is the best Sonic game in like years, probably since Mania. Go play it, even if you're not a Sonic fan. It's got a lot of cool references to past games that really confirmed whether certain things were canon or not. So it's just really well written. The music is great. The gameplay is a little janky at times, but it's otherwise really good. Please go play. So the only reason we know that Riders is not like super far in the future is because of this like line of dialogue that Sonic will sometimes have. Essentially, if you leave your controller idle long enough, Sonic will kind of spout like a phrase where he'll mention a different character or what have you. And there's one where he mentions Jet.
Kinda reminds me of where we found Babylon Garden. Yeah, I wonder what Jet's up to.
And Jet is a character exclusive to the Riders series. So sometime between like Forces and Frontiers, he meets Jet, I'm assuming. So yeah. And it's the latest game in the timeline, and the latest game to be released, so yeah. So let's review. My official Sonic timeline is as follows. SEGA Sonic the Hedgehog, Sonic 1, Sonic CD, Sonic 2, 3 and Knuckles, Mania, Sonic 4, Sonic Forces, kind of, Mania Adventures, Sonic Adventure 1, 2, Heroes, Shadow the Hedgehog, Sonic Advanced 1, 2, and 3, Sonic Battle, Sonic 06, kinda, Rush and Rush Adventure, Rivals, kinda, Secret Rings, Unleashed, Black Knight, Colors, Generations, not Boom, Forces, Riders, Riders Zero Gravity, Free Riders, Team Sonic Racing, and Frontiers. So, yeah. Anyways, my name has been Brupod. Thank you for watching my channel.